Welcome to Christian Living in the End Times. I'm Jamie, a pastor, author, and a teacher. The book of Genesis is so important in the times that we live in. Christian living in the end times, so very important to know about the book of Genesis, because that's the book of beginnings, isn't it? That's where we understand that God made everything, and so very important because everything else in the Bible really flows from that. And if we have a creator, then we're accountable to our creator. And not only that, but our creator loves us enough that he understands that we're desperately in need of a savior. So he's provided Jesus Christ, his only begotten son, for us. Well, Moses wrote the book of Genesis about 1445 BC. The Jewish title is in the beginning. Isn't that right from the first sentence there? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And so if you'd walk into a Hebrew scroll shop and ask for the Hebrew scroll of in the beginning, they would hand you the book of Genesis. That's what they would give you. Well, our English word Genesis comes from the Greek title Genesis. It means origin. Origin. So these are the same things. The origin of everything, or when everything started at the beginning. God's always been around, but yet he's created particularly human history, humans and things associated with that. So the Genesis talks about how we began. Well, the Pentateuch means 5 books, and we call the Pentateuch Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We also call Genesis the first book of Moses, which means Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy would be the other 5 books of Moses, or the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th books of Moses. With them all, you have 5/5 of the law. So if Moses didn't write the book of Genesis, then you only have 4/5 of the law. You're missing something. And so Mosaic authorship of the book of Genesis has been doubted in our generation and the last century or two even, but it really wasn't doubted that much until more recent times, and evolution came on, and things associated with that just really caused people to doubt about a creator, and people really wanted to get away from the Bible. So not just evolution, but just Bible scoffers in general. Well, what's interesting is there's a pronoun for she. The Hebrew word for she is spelled a little bit different. It has a different letter in it than a normal Hebrew spelling, and this is used all throughout the Pentateuch, I think, except for a few times. And so whoever wrote Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy also wrote Genesis. You see, that's something unique. God, I think, put it that way to show that there's continuity in the authorship of all these books of the Pentateuch. So Moses wrote the first book of Moses. He wrote Genesis. We don't need to doubt that. So again, the theme is origin. And the Hebrew word toldo is where we get our word generation from. And so that's the outline, the natural outline. Yes, we have chapters and Numbers in our Bible today, but just in the text itself, when you see these are the generations of, that's your new section for the next section. That's your key or your clue for the next section. So these are the generations of heaven and earth. There's one section. These are the generations of Adam, another section. These are the generations of Noah, or these are the generations of the sons of Noah. And so these are the natural outline or the change of thought as you're reading down through the book of Genesis. And so also the human history. Genesis is the beginnings of human history. There's really no prehistory. There's really nothing prehistoric because we have history going right back to the beginning. So in the beginning, God already existed, and then he wrote everything down. He wrote down what he did at the beginning when he created everything. So there's really prehistoric is again an evolutionary concept that's kind of people try to place onto things, but there's no room for it in the Bible. Well, human history, that means Genesis, the beginning of man, and the beginning of woman. Genesis, the beginning of man, husband, and father. Genesis, the beginning of woman, wife, and mother. You want to be a good mother? You want to be a good father? You want to be a good husband? You want to be a good wife? You want to have a good marriage? Genesis is the place to go to start at. And you can see good examples and bad examples there in the book of Genesis. Genesis, the book of marriage. Remember, Adam could walk, talk, and get married all in the same day. Genesis, the book of marriage, the beginning of marriage, beginning of family, beginning of home, beginning of children and child rearing, beginning of animals and plants. You will also see it's the beginning of angels, heaven, earth, beginning of space, time, and matter. Space by the meaning of heaven, that the heaven was thinly stretched out. That's kind of what that means there. Beginning of time. Well, that's our phrase there, in the beginning. That's a time marker, a preposition of time there, in the beginning. There's a time place there, and it's a matter would be earth. So Genesis shows us the beginning of time, space, and matter, space, time, and matter. Well, evolution would say that through lots of death and retrial and everything, and that's how mankind came to be, is that through all the pond scum and the or primordial soup or whatever they call it, and finally you get up to all these weird looking animal things, and don't forget you need a pink one and a blue one as you come along, and then also finally you get up to some kind of a animal like thing and looking more like a human, and finally we get humans like we are today, and through all this process of death over millions of years, just the opposite of what the Bible says. Bible says that God created man as a whole being. He created female, Adam and Eve, and death didn't occur until after they sinned. That was the payment, the wage of what they earned when they ate the forbidden fruit. Then they died. Well, he lived almost 1,000 years, but he still died, and so death didn't come until after mankind came. Evolution says it came way before mankind came. So there's a big difference there. Genesis, the book of salvation and the announcement of salvation. It's a book of beginning of grace, beginning of languages. Why do people around the world speak different languages? Well, look in the book of Genesis and you can find out. It's a beginning of revelation, that is God speaking from God to man, and it being written down, and Him revealing things to us. It's the beginning of Israel as a nation, and it's the beginning of all the nations, and the beginning of human government, all the nations. Well, as we've already seen, the book of Genesis begins with "in the beginning," obviously. Well, the last 5 words in the book of Genesis also begins with an "in," in a coffin in Egypt. It goes from "in the beginning" to "in a coffin in Egypt." What happened? What happened during those 50 chapters of Genesis? Something went wrong, because God declared that what He created was very good, and next thing you know, somebody, this would be Joseph, was put into a coffin in Egypt. Not even in Israel, the Promised Land, but what happened? What went wrong? So God explains that, and things that we need to know: where we came from, why are we here, what's God's plan of salvation, what's God's plan for family and home and the earth and plants and animals and the nations and languages and grace and the nations and the nation of Israel. Well, all these things are introduced in the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The word for God here in the Hebrew is Elohim, and this ending shows us that it's actually a plural noun. Elohim is plural, but yet it's translated singular, as it should be, as it should be. And one of the reasons why is because of the verb. The verb does the driving. The verb bara just means he created. It's a completed action. A normal word just means completed action, but you would say he created. But now when you put that verb next to a subject, God, you would translate, the verb would influence the subject so that you would translate it in a singular fashion. So God created, not gods, even though the same word is translated gods in other places in the Bible, particularly talking about the heathen gods, the Elohim, the gods. But here it's God created. But in Hebrew we have words that can be singular, dual, or plural. Plural would be three or more, never two, but three or more. And so here's the Elohim. So Elohim introduces the idea of the Trinity, the idea of the Trinity, that there's one God, but yet three persons in the Trinity. You don't get it fully developed here until the Bible progresses, and then particularly in the New Testament, the Lord reveals that to us more. But here, there's nothing contradictory with that, but like we said, it introduces the idea of the Trinity. And then heavenly, earth, haaretz, it's singular, one earth, but heaven, here it's singular. It's translated, some people put heavens in there, but it's correctly translated heaven, because shamim, a little bit different ending there. This is our word for heaven, and it has the dual ending, and it's not singular and it's not plural. And so by this we mean that in Hebrew has a dual, and I guess I could say in English a couple examples. The first one, if you wear glasses, you would put on a pair of glasses. Well, you're putting on one pair, but why do we call it a pair? Pair means two. Well, because your pair of glasses has two lenses. So a pair actually is a singular noun, a pair, but it references two things, two lenses, because we have two eyes, right? And so another example would be a twin. If someone says, I am a twin, well, that's a singular noun, a twin, but yet in referencing to two, like a mom might have twin girls. So there's talking about two girls, but yet twin is a singular word, a singular word. And so therefore we would say this dual word shamim for heaven references two, but yet it's translated in a singular. So we would say heaven and not heavens. And so William Tyndale understood that in his Tyndale translation. He said heaven and earth. Later on, the Geneva Bible translated it singular heaven. Martin Luther, in his German Bible, translated it singular. And then also, even looking at a Spanish Bible, the RVG, I noticed that it was singular as well. So the Spanish word there was singular. See, the reason is that there's a Hebrew reason behind that to translate it singular, and these translations got it. If you see a translation today that says, well, it's a plural, heaven is a plural word. It's not, actually. It can be translated plural, and it is sometimes in other places, but yet this is the first usage of it here. And again, the verb form, it's a dual. And what I'm trying to point out is that there's a couple things here. One, we just need to stay close to the Bible. Be people that tremble at God's words, tremble at the original language behind it, in this case Hebrew, and tremble at the way that it's translated as well. It makes we don't want to tamper with what God is saying to us. But it helps our theology here too as well, because Paul told us that he knew someone caught up to the third heaven. Some people think it's referencing Paul himself, but anyway, he said, I know a man caught up to the third heaven. Well, if there's a third heaven, that means there's a second heaven. That means there's a third heaven. So here, in Genesis, the Genesis account here, we see God creating the firmament, or called heaven, and birds fly there. So that's our atmosphere where the birds fly is the heaven, the sky. And then also we see the sun, moon, and stars. Here's the heaven also. God stretched that out, and so we would call that outer space. So heaven number 1 would be our atmosphere. Heaven number 2 would be the sun, moon, and stars in outer space and the galaxies. But yet the third heaven is God's throne room where he's at. We die, we go to heaven. Jesus said, and I go to prepare a place for you. He's in heaven preparing that. And so, and what does this mean with our dual word here? It means that when God is explaining what's going on here in Genesis, he's explaining the first and second heaven. It looks like there's no reference actually to the third heaven right here in this Genesis account. There could be, but it's just not explained or expounded upon. You can still use the application. Well, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. You're going to go to heaven when you die. Yeah, you can still use that as an application for people as well. But strictly, maybe God's explaining, when you look down at what he's done, he's given us an introductory statement here, and then he explains what he's doing. And so just something to keep in mind there. And so he said, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the deep. And so here some people read evolution in between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. They would say there's a gap. There's a big gap of time here between verse 1 and verse 2. And so that's where evolution happened, basically, or an evolutionary concept anyway, is where God created an earth. Maybe Satan fell, and now he's in ruin and wasted the earth, and now here's a recreation of the earth. But yet God said this is the beginning, so it's not a recreation. This is the real thing. This is the original creation, the only creation, really, as far as the heaven and earth goes. And the Hebrew goes along with that too. It explains it as well. Without form is tohu. Tohu, it just means incomplete, not done. And then void is bohu, their Hebrew word bohu, and it just means empty, no people, uninhabited. When I was working in construction, sometimes we'd have to go into a new construction home. The outside was done, but we had to go inside and put up some sheetrock, help the electrician run some wires, and maybe sometimes do some trim work, some painting and finish work and tiling and things like that, to finish it up so that it could be sold and the new homeowner would move into it. I think that's a good example here of what's happening, is that God created, let's just say, a blob of clay, the earth, but it wasn't formed yet. And so now he, as the master potter and sculptor, has to go through and to complete his project, his creation project. And then not only that, is once he gets it sculpted, he's going to put plants and animals and people there. So all this means is the earth was without form and void. It just means that it was incomplete and uninhabited, like a house under construction. It was not done yet, and nobody was living there. That's all that means. And so we don't have to read something in there that's not there. It's just plain and simple. Plain and simple. And so, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So in the beginning here, Jesus quotes this a couple times. He said in Matthew 19:4 that, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? So Jesus understood that the creation account was at the beginning. That was where it all started, male and female. Mark 10:6, he says, but from the beginning of a creation, God made them male and female, male and female. You know, a lot of the gender confusion today could just be settled by people reading their Bibles, because Jesus himself said, have you not read? Have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? Isn't that obvious? Why reject God? Why reject his plain words? Why go against what he's doing? Why go against what he's doing? We need to be people today that stand upon God's words. We need to see that God means what he says, and he says what he means. We have a creator, and we're accountable to him. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Do you believe that?